Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game faction focus for the Nomad Nation. In this video, we'll talk about who Nomads are, how they play, what are their strengths, limits, and faction identity, before jumping into Infinity Army to go through many of the profiles that showcase this fascinating faction. Now, before I begin, I have three pieces of thanks to give out. The first are to channel supporters Anti-Pansy and Matt Bissell, both of whom have made requests that Nomads be featured in a faction focus video. Guys, I hope very much you enjoy this video. Secondly, big thanks to Burlsford. For those who don't know, Burlsford is the person who puts together the model identifier sheets. You can find them on the Human Sphere wiki, and they're what I use to show off miniatures against profiles in these videos. The previous Nomad one was actually a little bit out of date ahead of recording this, and Burlsford was kind enough on request to provide an updated copy, which will actually be going live on Human Sphere relatively soon, but he was able to send it through to me so I could record this video. Burlsford, thank you so much for making those sheets and for getting me a copy so I could record this. With those thanks out of the way, here's how we're going to do this video, because I have made a terrible self-indicting realization. I'm going to give you the normal, face-up, optimistic appraisal of Nomads as a faction. It's going to approach them broadly competitively. It's going to talk in a straightforward way about their strengths, limitations, and identity in the same way that I do for any video. And then I'm going to tell you the terrible secret about why I fucking love Nomads. This realization is cursed knowledge which I regret, and I'm going to choose to share it with you, with the full expectation that at least some people will disagree with me. But I hope you'll stick around for the army section, as we go through so many of the fascinating profiles that make up Nomads. So first, the straight-up appraisal of Nomads. What are their strengths, limits, and identity? Well, to begin with, they are a hacking faction. Kind of same as it ever has been. Hacking has always been a strong part of how Nomads play, but in the context of N5, let's qualify that a little bit. Because while I do think in N5 one of the strengths Nomads have is to be able to scale their hacking up to quite good, how I feel they sit and a particular faction's strength is that they have a lot of really good ways to play enough hacking to impact the game, enough hacking to be useful and meaningful without over-investing. And that's something that I think is particularly useful at the moment because I do feel that in the current metagame, hacking is on a slightly low ebb. Two things have caused that. The first is the change to pitchers and pitcher range bands, which has made the casually easy network projection of previous months' metagames and editions of the game vanish a little bit. You tend to have to work more now to get your repeaters out there, and that is changing how people value hackers and how much they play them. And Nomads are a partial but not complete exception to that. And then secondly, there have been some models that have been introduced to the game since October last year, but even through recent updates, that have really just been dominant hackers that are not worth fighting. A model like an Asura is not worth contesting in the hacking game. It's better to just let her have it and play your own game around her. And I feel, at least locally for me, that's producing a situation where hacking is useful. It's an addition to the force mix. It's certainly nicer to have it than not, but what you're kind of looking for is enough hacking that it's a frustration and an obstacle to your opponent without representing a massive investment or opportunity cost on your part. And that is a serious strength of Nomads. Nomads have lots of ways to get enough hacking to be very meaningful and useful without over investing. Now, the poster child of this is Jasmine Jazz, where in a single cheap model you get, okay, technically a pitcher, you should probably never fire that. What you actually get is a cheap hacking device plus with Trinity. That's everything you need from a hacking platform, including white noise, which is very useful, Trinity, which lets you punch down into weaker enemy hackers who are just trying to play the just enough hacking game themselves, and the ability to cybermask and protect yourself against enemy alpha hackers. Jazz kind of covers all of your bases, but she isn't even close to the only way Nomads can play with their toe slash foot slash ankle slash chest in the hacking game, depending on what they want. Kulak hackers are an excellent way of getting hacking with upside into the faction. Zoe is a model where if you wanted an engineer, you can get an intensely difficult, good quality hacker to enliven your hacking network, kind of just at cost as part of buying a clockmaker. And then even at the top end of Nomads, the Interventor package, which is usually an Interventor hacking device plus lieutenant and an Interventor killer hacker, does use 2 troop slots, but it's still very efficient, very effective, and actually one of the hacking platforms that is difficult for a piece like an Asura to punch down into. And that positions Nomads as a hacking faction in the sense that they are very, very good at choosing exactly how much hacking they want in a force and getting it into the force at an attractive cost. That's not the same as things like Gabriel Deferson or an Asura, where you very heavily invest for a dominant presence. But you get very close to that at a much cheaper cost, and that's really valuable. Next, Nomads are a faction with just very serviceable gunfighting, kind of positive connotation there. Nomad guns do the job, and you've got plenty of choice as to how you access them. Historically, they were a faction that would often take advantage of their tags. You've got access to things like the Salamandra, which is a hypermagnetic cannon on a tag platform. That's just good. But the Intruder is also an outstanding gun. You have things like the Kriza Borak, and while your ballistic skill tends to top out at 14, what you do have is the ability to combine hacking and especially ample access to hacking devices plus with things like the Intruder to be usually able to do both smoke shooting with the Intruder and white noise shooting with some other gun to be able to basically always stack a negative mod on your opponent. If you're running something like a Go pod and you're intending to use it in a suppression of enemy air defense role, that's a play that can have a lot of fragility to it, but it is ably supported by white noise, which gives you a Mimetism 6 model inside a white noise zone, which will always stack at least some negative mod on an enemy. And that feels very quintessentially Nomads to me. Being able to almost always have access to both smoke and white noise shooting is a way of never playing fair with your gunfights. And that's really nice and feels quintessentially Nomads. Another faction strength is that it is a faction with fantastic, perhaps the best, access to peripherals. Now, technically, you can do things like run a Neo-Terran Capitoline army in Panoceania with as many or more peripherals and therefore trooper equivalent models on the table, but that means running lots and lots and lots and lots of Oxbots, which actually is pretty good and kind of funny, but it isn't a build with variety and versatility. Nomads have access to lots of different kinds of peripherals. Everything from the 1-point melee Pupnik up to puppet bots and Bamba bots, and the Zonnauts motorcycle even. You can get lots and lots of models inside Nomads, which can give you a very high wound count, even if many of your models individually might be single wound. As someone who loves peripherals and thinks they're really cool and one of the most interesting things you can do in Infinity, particularly in N4 and N5 where our troop slots are contained, that's something I really like. Now, I mentioned quite a lot of single wound stuff, and that is true, but another strength of Nomads is that they have probably some of the best medium infantry in the game. And really only in the second half of 2026 would I have even considered saying that as a faction strength, but actually, Nomad single wound troopers tend to be exceptionally high quality. Mostly, but not completely, off the back of the Corregidor update, where there have been some very interesting medium wound models, medium infantry models, single wound troopers added to the faction, which are very, very appealing. Now, you aren't locked into taking single wound troopers. There's plenty of tags and heavy infantry, other elements that you can absolutely play and should play. Nomad lists will often have a very healthy wound count, but it is something that's interesting and unique, and that's worth focusing on. Now, in terms of models that do have multi-wound, I probably have to just mention the Bearcat as a strength, and it's a little weird to mention a model as a singular strength of the faction, but let's not beat around the bush, the Bearcat is the best drop troop in the game. In many cases, actually, it is close. The game has a lot of good drop troops to choose from, but the Bearcat is the best of them relative to cost, the impact that it has, how well it is statted, how its profile works. It's the Bearcat, and the Bearcat exists in two places, Corregidor and Nomads. However, interestingly, the Bearcat is just one of 3 good options that Nomads have in terms of drop troops. And while you'll take it often, you are not forbidden from taking the other pieces. Hellcats can be very interesting and effective and are often significantly cheaper, and the Meteor Zond is a fascinating tech piece. And because of that, having a model that's off the table, your opponent will probably assume a Bearcat, probably rightly in many cases, but there are other interesting options that you can also take that open up different plays and which should be defended against differently, and that can be exploited. Finally, just as a note, like most modern factions, and Nomads post the Corregidor update are definitely a modern faction, generally good access to order counts if you want them, You should not struggle in Nomads to hit a nice healthy count for most of the game, which means you can take full advantage of all of these cool and interesting pieces that you've got. Now, those are the strengths. What are our expected limitations here? Well, like basically every non-Pan-Oceanian faction, your guns do top out below Apex firepower. There is no ballistic skill 15 to be found here, and even ballistic skill 14 is constrained to the tags. That can be something you feel occasionally. Nomads can stack negative modifiers really well, but then you do still have to roll with ballistic skill 13 to hit, and you can feel that sometimes. The Intruder Sniper, for example, post Corregidor update, is a really, really, really good piece, but sometimes 3 dice on 13s will just fail you, and you'll have to spend another order, hope that your opponent wasn't shooting you back. The GoPod is very much the poster child of this, but there are other things in Nomads as well where you put a gun into the faction, and you have to be very considerate of the fact that it's probably rolling 3 dice on 13s, and that just comes with a degree of expected failure some of the time. It's something you have to bear in mind when you're playing Nomads. Secondly, this is a faction that will sometimes struggle with superfluous equipment. A lot of the stuff in faction is paying for maybe one skill or one piece of equipment that's cool, but perhaps a bit extra to requirements. If you want to make yourself sad, go and compare a Mobile Brigada heavy machine gun, or in fact almost any heavy machine gun in the faction, maybe short of the Kriza with something like a Heate from Nomads. The Heate AP heavy machine gun compared to a lot of the HMGs we've got is just like, wow, that's a much more efficient profile than the Brigada with higher fizz, higher willpower, and a 360 visor and courage. Kind of feel like maybe I shouldn't be paying for all of those things. We make it work, absolutely, but you will occasionally have pieces that are fit for purpose, but you have to find the efficiency outside of them. You have to find the efficiency in your peripherals or your hacking elements. Stuff like Masai Morans and Morlocks to subsidize just a little bit those other elements that you take because you need to, but perhaps are slightly less efficient than some other factions. And then finally, the biggest limitation I would note about Nomads personally is that they can be a little bit thin or fragile on the defense, and in a very specific way. Nomad defenses are not bad. In fact, in many cases, they're very good. The hacking network that vanilla Nomads, even with a single Masai Moran, can establish, you almost always have a Moran, which means one midfield repeater plus a midfield mine layer. You have access to other mine layers. You can get an engineer into the faction in multiple different ways quite easily if you want to, and combine that. Force reconstitution, remotes. We have access to a variety of very serviceable corner guard elements. We can use our peripherals as ablative pieces to hold off attacks. All of that absolutely allows for a good Nomad defense, but one thing that you will almost always find in Nomads, certainly in any Nomad list that I write, is that if your opponent is able to exploit a gap in your defenses, Nomads are one of the premier cookie jar factions in the game. What do I mean by that? I mean that if your opponent gets past your defenses, they get into the cookie jar, they get into the treats, and there are high value targets almost always sequestered in a Nomad deployment zone that you just do not want killed. Whether it's an obvious lieutenant, or the puppet master, or your engineer, or the only hacker that you're taking. Like if you're running Jazz, for example, then she's part of the cookie jar. She's there to turn your repeater network on and do useful things, and she's cheap, but if she dies, oh shit, all of my repeaters don't do anything now. One of the things about running peripherals is that there is usually one model somewhere with a single wound, whom killing will turn off multiple of your troopers. I really like coyotes, they're one of my favorite units in the entire game, but if the coyote goes down, well, the Bambabot turns off as well, and there's a lot of value gone in one trooper. Even something like an intruder, which is a very high value piece offensively and sometimes in ARO as well, thanks to the special die on the sniper, can be a frustratingly clean kill for your opponent if approached in the right way, because it is ultimately a single wound piece. And so, overwhelmingly, the largest limitation that I find in Nomads is just keeping all of those precious pieces safe behind the defenses that I establish. Those defenses are good, but if there's a breakthrough, if a drop troop I didn't expect lands, if something finds a line, if a part of the defense just collapses far more easily than I expected, then you are in white knuckle territory trying to hold and keep your puppet master alive. People don't play Assassin for days in Hackaslam terribly often these days, but a classic Nomad experience is going second, knowing a Assassin for day is coming or something equivalent, and having to decide whether your puppet master or your interventor lieutenant is the model you reserve drop to keep safe, because you just can't reserve drop both of them. That's the quintessential Nomad experience on the defense. Even a red eye is the vehicle that is most afraid of almost any vehicle of getting caught in the enemy active turn because of how fragile it is. Once again, the Nomad cookie jar. If you can manage this, the faction is wonderful to list build and play for, but it is something that you really have to think about, and if you are casual with your defense, you will be punished. And so, overall, that gives us a faction identity of wide capability mixed with some fragility. Nomads are a faction where when things go right, I feel like a genius who can do anything. This list, this faction, we have it all, and that is so cool. But when things go wrong, and they can, especially over the course of a 5-round event, for example, you will occasionally wonder whether in fact your force is simply held together by duct tape, and how you're supposed to survive when all of these things that you need have just one wound, and your opponent is spec firing you with a courier. I like Nomads a lot, but there is that tension in them that you must manage. Often the best way to do so is simply use all of that capability that they have to proactively go after and deal with those things that might exploit your defenses and get into the cookie jar. Because when they are on the front foot, God, Nomads feel just excellent in terms of all of the different things that they can do. Now, pause. That's the glazing done. Perhaps a little bit unvarnished, but that is my broad take on Nomads. And if you are a sensible, serious competition player interested in just playing Nomads for a little bit as part of your broader experience, or even a serious competition Nomad player who takes things very seriously, you should probably put the video on mute now, or just skip forward until you see the army interface pop up, because we're now going to talk about the terrible secret I have realized about Nomads. Are they all gone? Okay. Here is the other part of Nomad faction identity. Nomads are, bar none, the best faction in the entire game for finding interesting vanity piece profiles. What is a vanity piece profile? Well, it's the I can fix it profile. It's the profile that you know is just maybe a little bit less efficient, maybe a little bit handicapped, but you can make it work. You're going to be the one that finally shows everyone how Mary Problems is viable in a list. You know that she's not most of the time, but this time, damn it, you will make her work, and you put her in the list, and you go to the event, and she does pretty well. And then in one game she dies because she's single wound, but you'll make her work, damn it. And Mary Problems is kind of the poster child. I think every Nomad player has looked at her at least once and gone, I can fix her. But there are so many of these profiles that you can access in Nomads, and it's genuinely fascinating. And what I should note as well is that what constitutes a vanity piece is completely different from player to player. I'm going to rattle off a long list in a moment of things that could be considered vanity piece picks, and firstly, it won't even be an exhaustive list, and secondly, probably about half of these will have people respond with, what are you talking about? That's totally viable. I love that profile. And that's completely valid as well. But there are so many of these in Nomads where it's just like, is this the thing that I flex into the list this time? Is this the secret tech? And 9 times out of 10, it was okay, or you make it work. And then 1 time out of 10, you're like, yes, I think I'm a Mind Layer 2 Cyclone player now. And that's a wonderful experience. I had a discussion a little while back on the main Infinity Discord that kind of invoked, if you're not familiar with them, the Magic the Gathering player archetypes. And there was a point put forward there by someone whose opinion I respect a great deal, is that those player archetypes are very limited. And I think if you take them seriously or religiously, that's exactly the case. But what they do serve as is just a nice insight or thinking tool into the general fact that players approach games for different reasons. Spike is an archetype of player focused on competition, but there are many different ways to be that kind of person. Now, despite the limitations that you have to accept of the Magic the Gathering player archetype model, there is a player archetype, Johnny, who I conceive of as playing primarily for discovery and self-expression. And if you are a Johnny, even if you're a Spike Johnny, for example, sitting somewhere in between the two, adopting elements of both, I would certainly identify that way, Nomads are a really good faction for you because this list of vanity pieces that might be for you represents a wonderful avenue of exploration. And these are things like Merry Problems, or the Unlinked Coyote, or the Zondnord, or the Mine Layer 2 Cyclone profile, or a Gecko duo, or Perseus, or Wolfgang Wolf, or Triggerman, again unlinked, the Grenzer Sniper, the Taskmaster duoed with a Morlock for great value. Even things like the Territorial or the new Stempler profile with the Ballistic Skill 12 Thunderbolt are pieces that are like, maybe you should take sometimes and maybe you shouldn't, but which represent that avenue for exploration where someone out there is going to point out the limitations of that profile. Sometimes it will be me. I'm telling you, the Grenzer Sniper is kind of bad. Probably don't take it. But maybe you'll be the player that gets really used to using it and finds the edge cases, and it's the piece for you. We're going to be covering these kind of profiles throughout this video a lot, and I find tremendous joy in them. But as I was going through and preparing for this video, it was a serious moment of self-indictment to just go through and sort of like develop this list of things that are like, oh, yeah, kind of vanity pieces, and go, damn, I want to play with like half of those right now if I can. I am genuinely worried that I might actually be a Cyclone Mine Layer 2 player. Like, it's got an X-Visor and a picture, guys. Surely it's got something going on. Even if the wiser head might be saying, just don't take 4 of these vanity piece profiles in the same list. Don't do that, at least. Oh, but maybe. And so that is the terrible secret of Nomads, and the reason why, yes, all of the things I said about strengths and limitations and identity, I do stand by. I think that is the mechanical identity of the faction, but the thematic identity of Nomads is a bunch of individual, slightly psychotic, very appealing, I can be the one to fix it profiles that represent a tremendous avenue for exploration, discovery, and self expression, and that is really on brand for this faction. And with that, let's get into Infinity Army and start going through some profiles and strap in because we're going to be here for a little while. I know, long runtime in a Rob Shepard video, who would ever have thought that could happen? I am actually probably going to have to breeze past some things in the interest of time, but I will endeavor to be as fair to everything as possible. We're going to start actually here with lieutenant candidates. Often I would start with link teams as those can form the mechanical basis of a faction, but really not so much in Nomads. And so how we're going to structure this is all of the things that you should basically put in many or most of your lists to begin with, and then we'll get into the long list of cool and funky shit. And so that means necessarily starting with lieutenant candidates, which means starting at the very cheapest end with moderators from Bakunin. There are not a lot of profiles we're going to be interested in our basic line troops, although technically I believe Morlocks are line troops, and those shit is good. But if you want a cheap lieutenant, moderators are 9 points and willpower 13. Nomads have got access to not a large number, but some decent quality NCOs, Tactical Armored Gear NCOs in particular, and if you're running a Tactical Armored Gear NCO, you don't need an expensive or flashy lieutenant, you just need 2 moderators. You take 2, one is a decoy, it is a nice safe way to play, and moderators have the interesting extra ability to be just a little bit more annoying to kill than you might think. They are BTS 3 Armor 0, but they do have shock immunity, and the main thing they have is CC18 and para CCWs -6. Classically, I would refer to this as the Sir, this is a Wendy's level of melee capability, where you don't ever want to shove a moderator into close combat, but if someone tries to jump your moderator in close combat, they will rapidly discover that these guys have spent the bulk of their careers wrestling down Morlocks outside of Bakunin waffle houses, and they are just frustratingly difficult to kill in close combat. The only other profile that you might seriously consider, and it's not the pitcher, is the hacker, which is just cheap. It's willpower 13, BTS 3, and 14 points, and sometimes there'll be a place in a list just for one more hacker to make your repeater networks just a little bit more live. That makes moderators from Bakunin have a place in your vanilla lists, certainly to the point that they basically completely obsolete Alguaciles, which is why we aren't going to cover Alguaciles and move directly on to Interventors. Now, Tunguska Interventors are my personal favorite lieutenants in Nomads. I've tried a bunch of different options, including the Territorial, which was introduced with The Corregidor update and actually can make a really interesting lieutenant, but I like Tunguska lieutenant options and the interventors are best of those. If I'm taking one interventor, I will usually, not always, but usually take two, and it's just a really nice combination. The interventor hacking device plus lieutenant gives you a willpower 15 lieutenant and one of the most annoyingly durable hackers in the game because it's one willpower 15 and two BTS 9. It has the highest BTS of any model in the game, and on a hacker, that's good. This is just a very efficient profile. Yes, they could theoretically be made more efficient if all of them had like light shotguns or SMGs, but that would be broken. These are still excellently efficient pieces, and a hacking device plus lieutenant will always be able to spend that order productively, whether it's throwing out a hacking attack or a spotlight, or even just cyber masking yourself and hunkering down. That's really useful. The other profile that I really like, oh, and by the way, if you have 2 points spare, then the Fast Panda Interventor Lieutenant is totally fine. Otherwise, take the cheapest one. The other profile that I really like is the Killer Hacker Interventor. Firstly, this is still, like even today, one of the best KHDs in the entire game. Incredibly high willpower, the incredibly good Trinity upgrade, Trinity -3, incredibly good BTS, and they come with their own repeater. A Fast Panda in 2026 is generally speaking going to be the best network projection in the game. It does not require roll, it always works, and it is always measurable. The downside is that it is obviously only range 8 and you do need to get into range, but the Interventor KHD can cybermask itself, it can move forward. This can be a little bit order intensive, but it's just a fantastic package. Now, it's a meta decision as to whether or not you need to spend 18 points for network projection and hacking dominance. In fact, hacking dominance that is even something of a threat to the real high watermark, very expensive pieces. Like, an Asura does not really want to get jumped in her reactive turn by a Tunguska KHD. That's actually a threat to her. That fight could go on for a long time, and there is always the risk that she wins the face-to-face roll and the Tunguska fails one of its very high BTS saves. But even an Asura kind of doesn't want to tangle with one of these guys, and that's just extremely efficient for 18 points. The big downside of taking two Tunguska Interventors is just that it is two of them, and that is usually going to be a combined total 39 points, which is affordable, but a little bit of an impost in a list. Still, my personal favorite lieutenant profile in Tunguska is in Nomads is the Interventor, and once I've taken one, I'll usually take a second one. Now, from here, we get a little bit more experimental, but I will have tried, I think, most of the ones we're going to cover, and one of those is the territorial. Now, since we're talking about territorials, we may as well address the variety of different options that we have here, because territorials are a fascinating set of profiles. I mentioned this in the Corregidor appraisal video that I did with Ollie. You can find it on this channel, that's Blessed Be. Wonderful person and great fun to talk to. Territorials are the vanguard of the Corregidor theme of, oh shit, are there good medium infantry now? And yeah, the Territorial is one. Now, it is still medium infantry, and it's expensive to boot, but a very cool set of options that we've got access to here. The important things generally at the high level are immunity shock and immunity critical means that you can almost always recover these if they go down. Now, in Corregidor, that's a little bit easier where you have like some linkability options. For example, with a doctor, you'd have to pay for a doctor, which you could feasibly do in Nomads these days. There are quite a lot of biological pieces you might want to bring back. Or you can go, well, someone's getting the one speed wall once per game, and maybe it'll be the territorial, but the ability to reconstitute them is a strength. Otherwise, two really important skills, marksmanship and tactical awareness, and there aren't really two better skills that you could slap on any profile to make it incredible, and the territorials make excellent use of this. Blizzard Skill 13 with marksmanship in particular usually means that by default these guys will be rolling a bunch of dice on 16s, and that's actually good quality range. The only downside in terms of internal synergies is that you often in Nomads want to be either smoke shooting or white noise shooting, and territorials can do neither. What I find that tends to mean is that they make really, really good second or third guns in your list. Not the first gun that I would reach for because they are single wound and they are limited to like Red Fury range bands, but a great gun after you've taken like at least two others. Now, the profiles here that are attractive, there are a couple. The obvious one, lieutenant or non-lieutenant, there are some chain of command profiles that you can avail yourself of. Kulak chain of commands in particular are relatively affordable. is the Specialist Operative AP Red Fury. This guy is a fire team in a can, whether you take it as the lieutenant or not. It's always got at least the tactical awareness order. It can move forward, it can take some shots if that's something that it's available to do, if it's got range and if it's got a target, or it can just move forward and set up and maybe accomplish an objective. It's an inefficient button presser if that's all you use it for, but the fact that it's a gun that can press buttons, that's good. And an AP Red Fury rolling 4 dice on 16s is a threat to almost everything. Now, the other profile that is interesting, especially in vanilla Nomads, and this is specifically, I think, the Lieutenant, is the Lieutenant Engineer profile. This is a model that 28 points is not cheap, and you'll be absolutely taking 1 or 2 peripherals for it, which puts it up to 31 or 34 points. But that is an engineer with 2 orders that it generates by itself before even getting to its regular order and anything it would take from the combat group. And that means that if you're running a big remote package, you could be running, say, Total Reaction remotes and the aforementioned Cyclone Sputnik, or Vostoks, or Racerbots. You can put just a ton of remotes in Nomads if you want, and this guy's job can be literally turn after turn to generate free orders that can be used to recover them. Now, I have played this and it didn't work as well in practice as I had hoped it might in theory. It was fine. It's just that much of the time, say if I was going first, there would be no productive use for those 2 orders on the first turn, other than to maybe preemptively move the little Zond bots around hoping to accomplish something. So it's a little bit of a I can fix it, a little bit of a vanity pick, there's one of those. But in the right list, it could really shine and be interesting. Now, continuing on the theme a little bit of lieutenants that do kind of want a chain of command option, we have the Kriza Borak. But lieutenant or no, a Kriza Borak heavy machine gun is a piece that I will often put in my Nomad lists as just a very good quality, very lean suppression engine. A piece that can just suppress enemy AROs and let other things move forward. He is one of the best models in the faction for doing shooting through white noise against enemies who have visors or marksmanship. And while it would be wonderful if he was slightly faster than 4-4 move, 6-2 would be fantastic, this is otherwise a good profile. It has running very little in the way of superfluous skills. It's got terrain, total, and courage, but everything else is predicated around just lots of bullets going down range. BS attack +1 burst, and ballistic skill attack -3, with 2 wounds, decent armor, decent BTS, and a serviceable ballistic skill of 13. And ballistic skill 13 becomes much more serviceable when you're throwing 5 dice at the enemy. Yep, heavy machine gun go bird. The Kreezer spent a bunch of time out in the woods during N4 when he was unfortunately packing Mimetism rather than BS stack -3. In N5, BS stack -3 is definitely not as good as it used to be now that there is a counter, but 45 points for 5 dice and a mod is 45 points and 5 dice for 5 dice and a mod. And he's basically a good balance of not as expensive as a tag with basically as much firepower as a tag. Finally, just to mention it, I guess, you can also run Mobile Brigada Lieutenants. If you're doing this, and frankly I think there are much better options and you probably shouldn't, but if you're doing this, it's probably the same way that Corregidor sometimes do, where it's access to a model with a Tinbot Firewall -6, and the Brigada can be linked, including with hackers. That's useful. Do I recommend it personally? No. It's a vanity pick, but there is a certain kind of person for whom, yes, my lieutenant will have a firewall -6 and will be giving that firewall -6 to hackers, which will make me very hard to hack if the enemy goes first. There's a certain kind of person for whom that is very, very appealing, and in some cases, the Mobile Brigada will serve a niche, and if you're doing that, well, you may as well take it as a lieutenant profile and get some dual purpose. Or you could just run moderator lieutenants and just have the Mobile Brigada hacker doing the same thing because it also has a 10-bot firewall. Veering from our expensive heavy infantry lieutenants, going through lieutenants that you have to add to a list, all the way down to the bottom end of the spectrum, some of the cheapest models in the entire faction, but ones that are extremely near and dear to my heart, the Morlock group. Just take 2 of them. Take 2 of them in every single list. That's my personal recommendation, and it's not actually because are they busted. No, they're just a warband. But you are almost always going to be taking an intruder because an intruder is a very useful weapon, and you gotta have smoke for him. And on top of all of that, Morlocks are just one of the better warbands in the game. Now, I recently did a white banner faction focus, and I spoke a lot in that video about how Shaolin monks are very good, in particular because they have stealth and genuine close combat. I like Shaolin monks, but Morlock group are my favorite warband in the game, and they are my favorite warband for a very, very specific reason. and it is not their melee. It is because Morlocks are a gun warband. There is one specific profile I recommend here, and it is the Assault Pistol Morlock. It's got a chain rifle, it's got an AP CCW with decent close combat. CC23, martial arts 2, that's totally fine, that could stab something. Metachemistry gives you decent random high roll potential. There are almost no bad rolls on the metachem table these days, or even no useless rolls. Very occasionally you'll have something that you don't need, but metachemistry is almost always useful. Upside, that's kind of cool. I guarantee you will roll the movement speed skills when it's impractical to do so. That's basically guaranteed, but metachemistry is good. But the reason why Morlocks are my favorite warband in the game is that assault pistol, because you can declare ballistic skill attack as part of an impetuous activation. And there is no feeling in the game like, well, it's turn 3 and I don't need this Morlock to do anything else, so impetuous, I guess, into the open, and there's some opponent 16 inches away that shoots you with a combi rifle, and you just fire back. And they're in cover, but it's 0 range band, so you're rolling 4 dice on 8s with the assault pistol, and you crit, or just hit them and win the face-to-face roll, because it's still 4 dice. And this Morlock, who is a warband, and just, we are so conditioned to be like, yes, warbands, it's a close assault piece, it will try and trade up by spending orders to get close to the opponent, to throw some smoke and move forward and get into close combat, like a Shaolin monk would use stealth to get into CC. And the Morlock is just like, nah bro, I've got this gun, and there is nothing in the game that feels like quite so much value as a turn 3 impetuous activation that just kills something with a pistol. It is utterly glorious, and it happens really consistently because Burst 4 just has a decent chance of winning face-to-face rolls. You can fire these guys off at targets 24 inches away and still be rolling 4 dice on 5s, which again, if your opponent is trying to shoot back with 1 dice, they're gonna just miss some of the time, and you're gonna just hit them and put them down with an activation that is essentially free deep in the game with a trooper that will almost certainly already have paid for itself with utility. Just take the assault pistols, and especially late in the game, take those assault pistol impetuous activations. It is so fun and not reliably in the sense of this will always work, but over a sufficiently large number of games, the value will become very self-evident. And for that reason, because I love that so much, I will basically always take 2 Morlocks in every single Nomad list. I probably wouldn't actually take 3 in that many lists. It would be nice to have a higher availability, but 2 is a very sweet number. Our next sensible practical thing to include in a list is the Moran Masai Hunter, and we know why these are good. It's a midfield repeater with Mind Layer, with Crazy Koalas, who is a specialist. Yes, they don't have a marker state, but the 0.5 SWC 15-point profile is just incredibly lean and incredibly useful. There have been lots of attempts to produce models that do kind of the same thing in a kind of different way, or mind layer deployable repeaters, or will have things like the Sirius bots. None of them have come close to being as efficient and useful as the Masai Moran, and that has remained true over multiple editions of the game. There are a few reasons why the Moran kind of remains still the best in class. One of them is just that it's the cheapest. 15 points is as cheap as it gets for that kind of capability, and cheap is good. Another is that the Masai Moran itself is a trooper with a repeater and stealth, which can make it very good at being a kind of different way to expend your hacking network. If you run a Masai Moran in Group 1 or in Group 2, I tend to like them in Group 2, but pick your poison. You can spend an order or 2 repositioning it, and unless your opponent has the ability to ignore stealth, it just quietly gets a repeater into position with no need to roll and no need to worry. Now, the Masai Moran doesn't have camouflage, so it isn't perfect, but you can just relocate these guys as a means of adjusting your moving frontline hacking area. That's really cool. In addition, they have a very nice combination of a zone of control repeater and a zone of control perimeter weapon. Much of the time, you will want the Crazy Koala to be maybe a little bit back from the Moran, but broadly sharing the same area of defense. Because what you want is a situation where you have an 8-inch zone, which if your opponent enters it, they must contend at the same time with a perimeter weapon that they would otherwise have to dodge and hacking arrows. That's a very powerful combination that synergizes with itself and leaves your opponent in a difficult position that they will otherwise, they have to make a hard choice as to how to proceed. And then finally, it's Mimetism 3 with a shotgun, that's Ballistic Skill 12, and a specialist. That's all valuable by itself. Just put a Masai Moran in your list almost all of the time. In some scenarios, it won't be the right choice, but bluntly, there are whole ass factions who would take a Masai Moran if it did not have infiltration. They would probably still use it, so you can afford to take it even in scenarios like actually crossing lines is a great example. It's a perfect piece for going in the forward deployment zone, even if you're ostensibly losing infiltration. So just take one in most of your games. It's useful and will pay dividends. Next, we have the Papa Tactica company, and I wasn't sure where to put these, so hey, we're putting them here. Now, I do think it's important to be realistic about the utility of Puppet bots in 2026. I still really like Papa Tactica, but I'm addicted to peripherals, so of course I am. But if we peel back those rose-colored glasses and we think about, okay, what is the actual value that these provide, there is enough that they should be on your radar much of the time as something to include in lists. And that starts with the fact that the Puppet Master is 11 points for a regular order with counterintelligence. You can do like nothing else with this. If you just take as 11 points a Puppet Master, it's counterintelligence for almost the price of a stock regular order. That is often, frankly, worthwhile. Now, there is at least one other source of counterintelligence in Nomads these days, so you don't have to take Puppet Master for that reason, but it remains a high value prospect. And having taken him, we get to the puppet bots. Now, what I wouldn't do these days is run like the full AVA3 puppet bots. It's just too easy to lose a puppet master, do something like Specfire, and have all of them turn off, and that sucks. I would also note that the force balance in N5 has kind of changed to a point where the offensive output of puppet bots is it's okay. They are a solid piece that can run forward and do some damage and be serviceable enough with their guns. But for example, that AP marksman rifle, even if given marksmanship, but definitely if not, is not always a weapon you would necessarily reach for. And so for that reason, how I tend to prefer to use puppet bots these days is to take one or two of the cheap 9-point profiles. And actually, most of what they serve as is very annoying ablative defenses, because it is still a forward observer with a flash pulse and a shotgun that has 2 wounds and incidentally dodges quite well, and just pushing past that on the defense takes time, often more time than is efficient, and for that reason, puppet bots just make good defensive speed bumps. You can spend one order to move them forward into a better position, or you can G up and go for a run with the 3 dice on 18's shotgun. You can even sometimes give them marksmanship and go for a 3 dice on 14's forward observer roll at long range if you're running a missile launcher. And by the by, Nomads are one of the few factions that I would still semi-regularly considering running a guided missile launcher with. They can fit it into their game plan. But it's really the ablative defenses puppet bots present that are the first reason I take them, because 9 points for a model that doesn't occupy a troop slot but has 2 wounds, a shotgun, and a flash pulse to defend with, that's valuable. And then sometimes they'll also be the piece that runs forward and accomplishes mission objectives on 14s and shoots things in the midfield. Solid and practical, and they only really become unaffordable if you start taking lots and lots of them. From here, we get into our hacking. As I mentioned at the beginning, Nomads are a faction that is very good at having as much hacking as they would like and not having to pay too much for it, and the poster child of that is Jazz and Billy. Now, as I mentioned, I personally really like an Interventor Lieutenant and Interventor KHD, but if you'd like to do most of what they can accomplish for much, much cheaper, Jazz and Billy is where it's at. Usually you will take the 18-point Jazz plus 7-point Billy, which does lock up 2 of your troop slots, but Billy is fine. He's a 7-point order with a repeater. If he does nothing else, that's totally okay. And Jazz is, as mentioned, Willpower 14, BTS 6 with a hacking device plus with an upgraded Trinity. She's just really good. The biggest issue with her is that if you take her, you're probably going to be running lean on hacking, and that can mean that your hacking can be turned off if something kills her. Keep her alive, keep her secret, keep her safe, and she is just amongst the best hacking in the game relative to the very cheap price point that she attracts. Next on the list of sensible inclusions, particularly with regards to hacking, are Kulak Payback Unit, hackers in particular, but there are some other profiles here we should also mention. But to start with the Killer Hacker, this is just a grab bag of utility for an attractive price point. To start with, the Kulak Hacker is a killer hacker with Carbonite. Now that means that it's 0 SWC, gives you killer hacker options against enemy hackers, which you will use some of the time if your opponent is also running light but not no hacking. But 0 SWC for Carbonite, which is a real ARO that can genuinely inconvenience heavy infantry, tags, remotes, etc., that's sometimes really, really useful. With the Kulak, you have the option of spending your SWC elsewhere and running one or two of these in the knowledge that the Masai Moran you took, for example, will still be very live. Secondly, the Disco Ball is really useful and it's a Ballistic Skill 13 Disco Ball. Nomads technically do have Eclipse, but it's rare and the best Eclipse in faction is on the Kulak. And if you are using the Kulak as your primary or only source of info wall, well, you won't have white noise, and so hey, it just solves that problem for you by bringing the Eclipse itself. Finally, in addition to just that really nice package of utility, it is still a Mimetism 3 Ballistic Skill 13 AP submachine gun profile, which can just randomly do some work at short range some of the time. Now, the second thing to note about Corlax is that they are linkable, but I'm going to recommend against the heavy rocket launcher. You will still sometimes link these guys. You will link them because you are taking two of them, and so hey, free fire team bonuses, plus one special dice on the disco ball. That's totally fine. But the heavy rocket launcher is one of those pieces where it's that limitation I mentioned before. Three dice on 13s with mimetism tries to convince you that's a real gun, but it's not really a real gun. You are not stacking anything close to the mods that an intruder does, for example, to make 3 dice on 13s valid in its case. You are just raw dogging those 3 dice on 13s in the hopes that a -3 penalty on your opponent is enough to stop them from hitting you, and it's not going to be enough. You will almost always declare shoot back at the Kulak, and they will lose that face-to-face roll plenty of times, and you're down 20 points, 1 order, and 1 SWC. It's just not quite a good enough gun, and frankly, it's not even a good enough second gun. You might sometimes use it as your third, but it's just too much of a siren song for me. I recommend against it. What I do think you can consider, however, is the chain of command profile. Now, at this point, the unit becomes very much a duo of convenience, where most of what you're doing is just randomly giving them +1 special dice for the disco ball and in ARO, but that's the best chain of command in faction. You can get chain of command on the shifter, but the shifter has a bunch of abilities that are completely inert in Nomads, like strategic deployment just doesn't do anything when you can't be in a link. Whereas the Kulak chain of command profile is a ballistic skill 13 +1 burst boarding shotgun with mimetism, and that will actually do some work if it gets into range. And so while I personally am usually pretty comfortable playing without chain of command, there are some pieces in this faction where you would want it. If you're running a Kreezer Borak Lieutenant, for example, you probably want a Kulak payback unit chain of command in the list. And if you're doing that, you may as well link it with the KHD and get a decent enough little two-person fire team that you could, theoretically, if you wanted to grossly overpay for a Panoshianian Bolt, also staple a Grenzer to. Finally, on the cheap, sensible, practical hacking profile, I did mention Zoe and I really like her. I don't like taking Pywell as often in this edition. You can, and he's fine, but none of the Pywell profiles really quite feel worth it. They're all very expensive. A lot of them are doing things like paying for a Ballistic Skill 11 pitcher that you just don't ever really want to use, even when it's burst 2 on the sync profile, but Zoe herself is very efficient. Especially Zoe FTO2, that's just a clean profile. If you are running a list that wants an engineer, well, 23 points for a willpower 15 engineer is a little bit expensive. That's a bit pricey. But for those same 23 points, you're also getting most of the hacking you would need to do a credible ARO setup with your hacking. Zoe is very hard to KHD thanks to Zero Pain, and is very good at AROing with her hacking attacks thanks to willpower 15, and paying 23 points and just one troop slot for an engineer you might need anyway, and a hacker you should have to enliven your repeater network, that's efficient. When you think about her as two troops crammed together to get a very solid result from both, yeah, actually at that point she becomes quite efficient, and is a great example of that kind of nomad archetype of we are a hacking faction because it is very easy for us to get hacking into the list. I needed an engineer already, I paid a few more points to make that engineer into a willpower 15 zero pain hacker, and now all of the repeaters that my remotes have also do this extra thing. That's really cool, I like her a lot for that reason, and that's the niche that she occupies. From our sensible practical lieutenants and our sensible practical hacking, we get into our sensible practical guns. Now, I have already mentioned the Kreezer and the Territorial, although the Territorial is more of a practical secondary firepower piece, still very good and useful. Now we get to the intruders. And while there are 3 intruder profiles, and they're actually all kind of interesting, even the infiltrator intruder could really give someone a surprise at some point. It is the multi-sniper that I recommend in most of your lists you spend your limited AVA1 intruder on, because it's just really, really good. 3 dice with double action rounds is very, very capable and comparable in the active turn to the heavy machine gun, and 2 dice in reactive is just, you don't actually want to use the intruder as an ARO piece. It's far too valuable doing smoke shooting in your active turn, suppressing enemy pieces that are vulnerable to that, contributing to your firepower mix. But sometimes you just need an ARO gun, and it's a camouflage mimetism MSV2 2 special dice multi-sniper. Damn, okay, that's actually pretty good. Like, you must be judicious with it if you're using it as an ARO piece. If you're playing against Caledonian Highlander Army, for example, there's going to be this temptation to put it in a position where it's watching the table to try and prevent the Cameronians from approaching. But if you have put it in position where it takes 1 ARO, does 1 wound to a dog, and then a Mormaer kills it, you have failed. You have to put it in very judicious, long angles, watch for where your opponent's guns are approaching from, and make it difficult for them to move to engage the intruder, while the intruder pinches off the rapid offensive unit approaches, stops the dogs from crossing a certain line. There's a whole learning curve to using the intruder as an ARO piece, but 2 dice, MSV2, Mimetism does make it credible as one. Just don't, for God's sake, waste it in that role. And in active turn, always get smoke down for it, always smoke shoot. Generally pick a vantage point that it will mostly play from. You can relocate intruders, like they're 4/4 move, they're under camouflage. You don't want to, but you can. Most of the time you want to kind of pick the position that the intruder will suppress the enemy from and plan your lines of advance under its fire. Not by any stretch of the imagination a cheap profile, but one that is very worth including in most of your Nomad lists. If we aren't taking a Kreezer Borak, frankly, sometimes even if we aren't taking an intruder, actually most of the time even if we are, we're going to want some other main firepower piece, and the main firepower piece we otherwise have is one of 2 main battle tags. Geckos are a 3rd tag available to the faction, but they're a little bit more of a specialist piece. And the Salamandra and the Gator are very comparable. You kind of want to just pick which one you can take and which one you can afford. I like the Salamandra just a little bit more because 5 dice and fewer points are both appealing to me. And frankly, so is BTS-9 a shocking amount of the time, but whichever you take, you're going to have a big gun that goes brr on a tough, durable platform. Comparing the two, the Salamander costs more SWC, but a fair chunk fewer points. It has NCO, but not tactical awareness, whereas the Gator has both, but it has just better active turn firepower. The Gator has a multi-HMG, the Salamandra has a heavy flamethrower. Sorry, a hyper-cybernetic cannon. Also, incidentally, the Salamander has a heavy flamethrower rather than chain rifles, so some delta there. But the main thing is the Salamander is cheaper and rolls 1 extra dice in active turn, and that's kind of just a selling point. It is the more efficient profile, specifically in the role of big long-range gun. The Gator, by comparison, is cheaper SWC but costs more points at 73, and that's quite a big difference, but it gets tactical awareness in addition to NCO. It actually has a surprising, it can do a little bit of close combat, or at least it is difficult to engage in close combat, thanks to CC21 and CC attack -3. And then in addition to tactical awareness, which is a genuine selling point, it's got a mine dispenser, which is a pretty cool piece to have and means you always have an outlet for that NCO and tactical awareness orders. You can fire, reload, fire. That's 3 orders, 2 of those the Gator provides with its NCO and TAC aware. And AP mines can combine in Nomads with things like deployable repeaters or emplaced repeaters, things like Masai Morans, to create a midfield materiel defensive mix that forces your opponent to do that thing that Masai Morans with their crazy koalas do, where they're forced to choose between dodges and resets against your incoming AROs. Both tags very viable. For quite a long time, the Nomad archetype was Gator plus often a GoPod, plus good stuff, and that was basically the entire list. I think the faction has very much moved past that with other recent additions, but there is no shame at all in falling back on a tag as your primary active turn gun, and there's enough cheap good stuff in Nomads to ably support one and still have an interesting 15 trooper list. Speaking of the GoPod, it is still a good quality vehicle and can feature in many lists. I am reaching a point where I kind of want to experiment a little bit with the multi-rifle profile. And that's off the back of recent experiences with the Yuqing Faiquan, where I just found that actually rifle rangebands are a really good combination with the mobility of pieces like the GoPod vehicles. Now, there is definitely reason to still play the heavy rocket launcher. It's Mimetism 6, it's rolling 3 dice, plus potentially the flash bolt from the GoBot. It's still got the AP submachine gun for close in use, and actually that AP submachine gun is more dangerous thanks to PS attack SR-1 than the multi-rifle, technically speaking. But what I find with the GoPod is that when you are trying to use it as a long-range piece, it's just one more of those things where 3 dice on 13s without really significant mods is actually not a real gun. A GoPod can engage a total reaction remote and just have a catastrophic failure moment, and it's not what I want to use a piece that costs 32 or 33 points to do. I want it to be a predator that punches down when I have cleared the way with other elements. Because make no mistake, the GoPod is shockingly vulnerable to bad luck. If this was a model that could take cover, it would be the equivalent of an armor -1 trooper, and that really does sell just how fragile an armor 2 vehicle actually is. I want to use the GoPod with the multi-rifle a little bit more than I currently am, for that reason. I wanted to get into position off the back of other pieces doing the heavy lifting and punch down, take that kind of rapid offensive unit that exploits gaps other things create. Because I personally find that the failure state that emerges when it's trying to create those gaps themselves materialize just slightly too often. Still, even if I am increasingly of the conclusion that it is probably actually one of the weaker vehicles and I have been excoriated for that position in the past, I do still hold it because vehicles are very, very good. The GoPod is still part of that category and is therefore by definition a really good piece. It is hypermobile and there is always an application for firepower plus hypermobility, and the GoBot is super cool. And on the topic of rapid offensive units, let's mention the Bearcat. We had to at some point. It's the best combat jump trooper in the game. I have extolled its virtues in this video already. It is 2 wounds, it is 6-2 move with super jump jet propulsion. It lands on 13s, it's got no wound incapacitation, armor 3, BTS 3, the Vita 1, so 2 wounds effective. It's a warhorse for some fucking reason, and it's got a +1 burst boarding shotgun. Now, my initial take on this was that there was always one profile that you wanted. The killer hacker with a firewall and the boarding shotgun +1 burst. And it is definitely, oh, and the boarding pistol +1 burst too. And it is definitely the most appealing profile. But the conclusion I have come to is there's actually a couple of other lines you can take with the Bearcat that are worth considering. Sometimes you will just need to save a point, and in that case you can downgrade to an AP submachine gun, which is effectively like just saying I would like -3 to hit, I suppose, for 1 point, which sucks, but you can still do plenty of damage with that AP SMG. It's still a hypermobile drop troop with a spare wound that can do tons of damage. Being worse than the 30-point Bearcat is just a way of saying it's not the single best drop troop in the game. The other troop profile for the Bearcat that I think we need to pay a bit more attention to than we currently are is the 27-point Paramedic. It's not a killer hacker. It doesn't have a firewall. It's rolling the AP submachine gun compared to the boarding shotgun +1 burst for only 3 points cheaper. But I will note 3 points cheaper is a lot. But the big thing that it has is a deployable repeater. And a deployable repeater on a combat jump 6-2 move super jump jet propulsion piece is really, really good. Now, it's not a always take. The killer hacker with the boarding shotgun is still the better, more dangerous, self-contained element, but just give some consideration to landing that deployable repeater AP submachine gun paramedic, like placing the repeater and then also going and doing Bearcat stuff. I think that might actually emerge as a very viable secondary profile because the total capability set is very useful and it plays more in conjunction with the rest of your army rather than being a Rambo by itself. In either case, though, just absolutely stellar profile. That's basically all of the boring, practical, sensible nerd shit done. And so the bulk of the remainder of this video is going to be dedicated to a rapid fire run through, okay, some other practical things that we should mention, but pieces that I think are damn cool. Let's go vanity pieces, rapid fire, work through these and see if anything leaps out to you as something that would be cool and fun and interesting to build a list around. Because this is where we get into that long list of like, can I fix it? Can I make this work? Will I be the person that is the Merry Problems player? And probably more than any other model in Nomads, Merry Problems has been the cross on which so many of us have been hung for our vanity because she is actually a little bit difficult to make work. She has a bunch of cool things going on. I think she's one of the sole remaining, like, she is the last remaining Trinity that is actually really genuinely dangerous, thanks to Trinity AP. That is an incredibly rare breed these days. And she's a forward deploying pitcher with ballistic skill 12 and mimetism 6 and climbing plus. She's 27 points. She's 27 points. That's a lot of points. But you will be the person some of the time who looks at this and goes, yes, a hacking device and a killer hacking device. And the Trinity upgrade and the Oblivion upgrade. Well, she dodges well on 13s. That's not good, but maybe. She's the quintessential example of the Nomad's vanity piece. I recommend against her in most lists, but maybe you can fix her. Next up, we have coyotes, and frankly, I hesitate to even include them in this category. Maybe I should have included them in, like, the gun section or something, because I think in Corregidor, everyone has cottoned on to the fact that these things are really, really good. In Corregidor, though, you can link them, and it's often going to be the linked profile there that is attractive because they're very easy to link. In vanilla Nomads, we have no such luxury, and so they're a bit more in that category of kind of niche, but they have rapidly emerged. Like, one game in with my first game with Coyotes, and I'm just like, I think this might be one of my favorite profiles in the game. My personal recommendation, what I've stuck with and continue to use, is the forward deploying Coyotes with Bamba bots, and in particular, I recommend the multi-marksman because it is an actual real gun. You can run the leaner, cheaper profiles and use them for kind of close assault, but 4 dice, ballistic skill 13, multispectral visor level 1, and Warhorse means you almost never take negative modifiers. Like, Albedo is the only thing that tends to produce a significant negative modifier on the Coyote, which means you can throw out those dice and have a good chance of winning face-to-face rolls. You may as well take an actual gun. It's not that expensive. The Bamba bot I specifically recommend is the Bamba bot 2 with the deployable repeater. Now, this is kind of a heresy for me, because I really like mine dispensers, but I am increasingly having to come to grips with the fact that mine dispensers are of only modest utility. It's often very easy to unpick whatever work a mine dispenser does. And a mine dispenser on a peripheral is often going to be kind of awkward to make effective use of. But one more model that is forward deployed and reasonably fast, having a deployable repeater, that can be very high value. I have been increasingly finding that mine dispensers are not transformative. They don't have transformative properties unless they're very, very, like, dangerous or important mines. Like, paramines can really brick an entire turn, so paramines on mine dispensers are really good, whereas the AP mines on Bamba bots they're fine, they're okay to have. But a deployable repeater in the right place at the right time can change the course of an entire game. So I am just saying it now, recommend the Bamba bot 2s. I really like Coyotes. There's a bunch of things about them that I've mentioned that are already good. They can do nice and interesting things with their own personal firepower. In Corregidor, they link excellently, but in vanilla Nomads with the Bamba bots is where you start getting all of the fun and interesting things happening. Because the peripheral works very, very nicely with the Coyote itself. Firstly, the Coyote and the Bamba bot are both forward observers, which means they're both specialists. Now, the Bamba is only a willpower 12 specialist, but having 2 bites of the cherry in a lot of scenarios is very valuable. I mean, it's just a very high chance of succeeding a willpower roll already. That's just good by itself. Having a very reliable specialist is good, but there are some cases where 2 successes actually does genuinely matter. Doing things like extracting identification tokens in last launch, 2 successes matters if you roll them. In axial interference, 2 successes on the central antenna can be a really big deal. And the fact that the Bamba bot is a forward observer and the Coyote is a forward observer opens up, if you have a guided missile launcher in your list, some interesting options with regards to just attacking the enemy and using that peripheral, both of you declare ballistic skill attacks. Now, I do need to note a rules interaction here because this is something where there may be some disagreement. I'm going to present my perspective. When I talked about Coyotes for the first time, and I think I may have played them in a battle report, some people were of the opinion that you can't, with the Coyote, declare a ballistic skill attack with his multi-marksman rifle, and with the Bamba bot, declare forward observer. I understand the rationale. I disagree. I think if you look at the wiki and you read the rules holistically, it is very clear that forward observer is the skill you use to make attacks with weapons and skills that are ballistic skill attacks. Ballistic skill attack is the skill that you use to make attacks with weapons and skills that are ballistic skill attacks. Forward observer is a ballistic skill attack. It's called that in the skill profile. Forward observer, I think, is even listed in weapon charts. It's very, very clear that the confusion, at least it's clear to me, that the idea that Forward Observer is an entire separate skill that is in some way distinct from Ballistic Skill Attack is just a product of how Infinity has to present its language. Infinity describes everything as a skill, and so the language the game uses to communicate model abilities kind of makes it appear more separate than it is. I think that it is totally fine to have the Coyote declare Ballistic Skill Attack using its multi-marksman, and the Bambabot declare Ballistic Skill Attack using Forward Observer. Both of them declare the same skill. Your opponent gets to respond to one, the Coyote takes the shot, and the Bambabot marks the target for a guided missile. I think that's a completely legitimate line of play, and really cool and interesting. Now, you may disagree, that's totally fine. If you are in the position where you aren't sure and you're thinking about playing this, especially in an event, the thing to do is always just to ask the tournament organizer. Then you know, either way, you're clear, you're covered, and you can play in accordance with whatever your local interpretation of the rules are. But that is my personal take. A long time ago, I coined the phrase that the rules for Infinity do not work if you interpret them like a malevolent genie interpreting a wish, and I do think that statement has been taken out of context occasionally over time, but I also do think it applies here. Seems relatively straightforward to me when you read all of the different rules that are interacting holistically. If you disagree, that is totally fine. And I did really welcome that exchange because it required me to deepen my understanding of those particular rules. Personally, I think the Coyote firing the marksman rifle and the Bambabot lighting up the target for a missile is just a super cool interaction, and I think it works, and I recommend them for that reason in addition to all of the other ones that I have mentioned in discussing this profile. Next, we have the Cyclone Sputnik, and in particular the relatively new profile, but oh god, this one calls to me like the Green Goblin mask. Now, make no mistake, cost is very nearly a showstopper here. 31 points is very expensive for a single wound model, even when it's Armor 3 BTS 6 with remote presence. But a Spitfire is an okay gun, especially on a 6.4 Climbing Plus platform. You don't ever want to use it for anything other than punching down, but it can do that. And Mine Layer 2 is a very good skill, especially on Crazy Koalas. Only forward deployment would really limit this profile if those weren't perimeter weapons, but they are, so its reach is actually significant. The Crazy Koalas can detonate on things crossing the halfway line. That's good enough for a Mine Layer, and Mine Layer 2 is really good. And then it is still a model with a pitcher and a ballistic skill 12 and an X visor. Now, I am very reluctant to suggest that maybe we should all take Cyclone Sputniks in order to use them for our repeater projection because it's an X-Visor pitcher, but Ballistic Skill 12 X-Visor pitcher, maybe as a Combat Group 2 profile, is worth at least experimenting with, because not many models in the game can project pitchers out like that anymore. And people are slowly losing the reckoning of what that does to the game state. I have seen a bunch of people, like when I was gathering feedback for the White Banner episode, some people very reasonably said that, oh, pitchers and guided missiles are gone from the metagame, and as a result, certain defenses in White Banner work. And that was a very faithful explanation of their experience and very reasonable. But what it also showcases is that people have settled into a new metagame, and that Cyclone, if you're just bringing back pitchers, has the capacity to disrupt that again. And doing something that your opponents expect isn't going to happen is inherently very powerful. And so while I absolutely think that 31 points and 1 SWC is probably too expensive, maybe it's not, or maybe the value exists there sometimes. Mine Layer 2 is very appealing, and if I'm getting an X-Visor pitcher as part of that deal, maybe there's something there. If you're a Starco player, you probably actually genuinely think this is an excellent profile, but as is well established, Starco players are having an excellent time and just should not be disturbed. They know exactly what they're doing. We need to move more quickly here, so let's go. Templazons, actually completely practical if you're taking the Tactical Awareness Combi Rifle profile. It's fast, it gets around the field, it brings all of a Templazon's utility, and Nomads especially value a mobile repeater. It's one more way to do network projection. But what if we were to spend 4 more points and give it a Ballistic Skill 12 Thunderbolt +1 burst? My brother in Christ, 3 dice on 12s is not a real gun. You would have to give it marksmanship, which costs its own expense. But what if we were to do that? What if we also spent points on the Evo Hacker? And what if we were to also run the Engineer Territorial so we can always recover it? It's AVA2. What if we were to run 2 of them? 2 of them means we'll always, and this is where like the train comes to a screeching halt and I bail out onto the station leaving you behind me, but It's interesting, isn't it? Like, it's an interesting idea. Thunderbolt plus one burst, BS12, tactical awareness. It's only 22 points. Has all of the utility of the Steplers on. Surely we could at least experiment with it. Surely it will do something. Oh, no, it didn't do anything, but maybe next game it will. This is what I mean when I say Nomads are a vanity piece faction, because there's someone out there for whom this is the profile. In fact, I know that person. He's one of my locals. And he should come down to the game store on Wednesdays and play a game, Chris, because we miss you. Bring your damn Stemplers and see how they go. Continuing the remote theme, we have Meteor Zones, and I feel like these guys have been the quintessential jank piece that actually works for basically forever. They are better now than they have ever been. The fact that one of them has an EM carbine is just hilarious because that is terrifying to turn up in your back arc and shoot at you. I do recommend you treat these more as parachutist than combat jump profiles because 11s is dicey, but on the other hand, look, they land, maybe they do something absolutely incredible. Don't take an Evo hacker just to help them land on 14s. It will only disappoint you. But there's lots in this piece that is like, maybe I'm the one that will make this work. And you absolutely can. I've been done in by these things terribly. Usually when they've used parachutist, not combat jump, but there's just such a toolkit there. And it's a repeater that can just appear in your deployment zone, or at least adjacent to it. That's really good. Next are geckos, which you can duo in vanilla. It's a tag duo. Okay, it's a little bit jank as a result, but it's still a tag duo. That's fun, that's worth experimenting with, it's kind of affordable, and it's 6 wounds at armor 6, BTS 6 with a bunch of shots. 5 dice on 13s has never let anyone down, ever. There's no way that that fails the moment it runs into mimetism. But maybe you'll be the one to make it work. They just got a new model. It'll be fun. Actually, the old model is just better. Buy the cool old geckos. They're super awesome. I like the new gecko models, but the old ones had style, and you could buy them in a 2-pack. Duoing these guys is absolutely jank, but fuck it, it's got to be worth a shot at least once. Next we have evaders, and again, maybe a bit unfair to say a vanity piece, but not a model I would previously have considered really taking terribly often in vanilla, but actually there are some things here that are kind of interesting. I conceive of the evader kind of as a utility friend, and I particularly like the 23-point plus 1 special dice boarding shotgun tinbot firewall specialist. You can put that thing in a duo. You won't get duo bonuses, but you just staple it to like a Kriza Borak and run them around together. The evader is a specialist and provides a tinbot and has climbing plus, and is an effective 2 wound model with a 3 dice shotgun for close range engagements. Thumbs up, that's pretty cool. The other interesting thing about the evader, and one thing that leads me towards at least wanting to consider one of the AP Spitfire profiles, is that the only profile in the entire faction that has access to albedo. Now, by itself, albedo is a fine and interesting and useful skill, but I talked at the beginning of this video about how Nomad firepower did tend to want to either smoke shoot or white noise shoot, and if you're going to be shooting through white noise, stacking albedo with that is actually not something that too many factions will do consistently, and to be fair, it's a very specific class of enemy models that you would use that against, but 1 SWC, 31 points, it's a specialist, it could theoretically be duoed. There might be something there. I prefer the 23-point boarding shotgun, but that's kind of interesting. Next we have Vigilantes. I spoke very highly of these guys during the Corregidor video. They're all really interesting profiles. Now, I wouldn't take any of them if I was running puppet bots, and I run puppet bots a lot, but I don't run puppet bots universally, and if you're not running puppets, then counterintelligence is the sweetener that leads me to go, yeah, okay, I can put a Vigilante in my list. I think of all of them, I like the Forward Observer boarding shotgun plus 1 burst the most because I'm a simple man and I like boarding shotgun plus 1 burst. But any of these profiles can be good and interesting, and having a camouflage marker rather than a model on the field that has counterintelligence can really mess with your opponent's mind. Just a good profile to take if you aren't taking a Puppet Master. From here, Triggermen. And Triggermen don't really need to be linked to be good, but also they are very expensive, and so they're absolutely a vanity piece in vanilla Nomads. I think there's someone out there who can make one or more of these profiles work in this faction. I don't know which profile that is. I think it might be the regular multi-sniper. It could potentially also be the Neurokinetics sniper. But these guys have got Ballistic Skill Attack plus 1 special dice, and it's very hard to make that bad on a profile that has real guns, mimetism, and multiple wounds. The points cost is doing its level best in the case of the Triggerman, but there's someone out there who can make these things work, and again, they don't need to be linked to be effective. I am personally a sucker for the K1 combi rifle profile, even though it is absolutely too expensive, and it is absolutely on a silhouette 4 base. 6-2 move helps there, but it is still awkward to get around, but the damage 6 K1 weapons are really cool, okay? And it's got the Emerat, and it's got drop bears. Drop bears with special dice are inherently hilarious. It's too expensive, but maybe I can be the one to fix it. There is a line to explore with Triggermen, and someone out there will make them work. A bit simpler, but something I did want to mention is Taskmasters. Objectively just not a very good gun for the points cost, but you can squeak in under 40 points on some of these, and they have Fireteam Master, which means that you can duo one with a Morlock and get that incredible value. Now, practically speaking, what I think that means is that the Morlock still just impetuouses, and maybe you've taken the Lieutenant profile and you spend that Lieutenant order to lay down a crazy Queller, and that's most of what happens during the game, and maybe something else goes on later, but there is something to explore, and there will always be a line where Fireteam Master representing value is a fun and interesting thing to follow. I think if they were to ever change Taskmasters to gain the Morlock tag, there'd actually be something there. But in the meantime, there's someone out there for whom the Taskmaster is the vanity pick in Nomads. Rounders are another profile that feels maybe a little bit unfair to mention in the vanity pick because they're relatively lean and simple, but they are also a thing that is very single wound, and which does tend to sing a siren song, a little bit like the cool payback launcher, heavy rocket launcher that needs to be resisted most but not all of the time. If you're taking one, I recommend the Red Fury, multi-marksman rifle as an alternate, but really you just need a dice for these guys, and what they're doing is throwing out, in the case of the Red Fury, 5 dice on 15s with a visor using the NCO. How 5 dice? Well, casino security rounders are linkable, and they link very nicely with Kulak payback units. I said not to take the Kulak payback unit heavy rocket launcher, and I meant it. If you want a gun in that team, reach for something like a rounder instead, because 5 dice on 15s with a visor will actually probably win face-to-face rolls, even if you are winning face-to-face rolls with a Red Fury. Back on the remote train, we have Vostoks, which are very appealing in many respects, but also ballistic skill 12. And so why I consider Vostoks to be a vanity pick, despite having many things about them that are really good. Calming plus, 2 wounds, decent guns, is that ballistic skill 12 when combined with Hypnotism 6 is just not quite enough. You need to supplement these things with marksmanship, and that means building a list around them. Once you've done that, they officially graduate to vanity piece pick, but there are people for whom Vostoks once were one of the premier weapons relative to points cost in the game, and perhaps could become, well, they won't become so again, they just don't do enough damage, it's just a Spitfire or a Mark 12. But they're tough, have climbing plus, and cost only 34 to 37 points even at the top end. A fun piece to play with, and again, a vanity pick. For someone, they will be the piece to explore. One of the models that I personally want to include more is Perseus Rogue Myrmidon. Myrmidon. I keep saying Myrmidon, and I will probably keep saying that because it makes people annoyed, and that amuses me. In a kind of gentle, non-spiteful way. I'm saying it wrong, I absolutely am. It's Myrmidon. From the Greek myrmidon, meaning ant nest. I am fully aware of the etymology, but it just has been stuck in my head as Myrmidion forever because we had a local phalanx player called Dion, and you can guess how that connection got made. Anyway, Perseus. He's pretty good. Burst 2 smoke grenades alone is really cool. He moves quickly around the board thanks to super jump. Prior to triggering Frenzy, he's actually a surprisingly dangerous gunfighter thanks to Ballistic Skill 13, Mimetism 6, decent rifle range band firepower, and the +1 burst. And if he gets into close combat, he kills things. Now, all he can do is fight. Obviously, he can't do specialist stuff. This isn't Tunguska, where we could staple him to a remote. But as an offensive piece, he's basically budget Hippolyta, and Hippolyta's freaking awesome, so surely there's something here with this guy. Just don't run him through a shock mine, because I guarantee you will fail the dodge, fail the armor roll, and shock immune he's not. Wolfgang Wolf. No, actually, this is too much even for me. Moving on. Uberfell Commando. A piece I think I have to qualify as a vanity pick, even though she's been one of the staples of the faction and a premier piece for very long, like ages. Uberfall Commando have always had high watermark performance, and while strictly they are actually less powerful in many respects than they have been historically, the Chimera herself is much less powerful. The underlying thing that you can do, which is run 2 or 3 Pupniks into close combat, and then effectively get old version Berserk, where your opponent responds to one and you attack with another and inflict 6 hits on your opponent, that all still works. Why I think Chimeras, Uberfell Commandos, are a bit of a vanity pick in N5 is that there is so much more going on in this edition in many respects. We put so much more performance obligation on so many of our units, and the skill obligation to get the most out of chimeras is still very, very high. Much of the time, they continue to elude me. And I felt like I had them reasonably dialed in previous editions. I've had to learn how to use them all over again. I'm still not quite there. And so, while 19 points for what they can potentially do is still really good, there's just enough going on. The Chimera has lost just enough lethality. The change to viral in particular was kind of rough on her. The change to eclipse grenades not having a positive range band. The change to the way the close combat worked, etc. All of the stuff that she can do, including just getting into CC herself with some Pupniks as friends, is still shockingly dangerous. But I personally feel like the high watermark for what constitutes shockingly dangerous has far exceeded her these days, and so the investment that she requires to perform at her best seems like it doesn't quite justify itself as much as she used to. But if you know how to use her, like Pupniks are 1 point. They are the cheapest model in the entire game. Even the robots that tags poop out nominally for free are cheap, are more expensive than a Pupnik. It is the cheapest model in the entire game, and you can always make use of a 1 point model that exists to do nothing other than try and suck down one of your opponent's orders. But to get more out of the Uberfall Commando than that is a bit of a skill investment, a bit of a learning curve, and often requires additional things to support her, because just throwing those Eclipse grenades yourself can really take a while to stick. She works much better with other things in smoke support. Stuff like Kulak, for example, can support a Chimera really effectively. But once you are talking about taking a 20-point piece to support a 19-point piece, even if the end result is actually quite effective, yeah, that's vanity piece territory. Finally, on the vanity piece front, before we just mention a few more practical things to round this video out, I have to mention Zond Nautica. I have never made them work, and I feel like there should be something there. 17 points for the boarding shotgun and the Zond Naut. My brain is consistently of the opinion that there must be something there, and it just doesn't really work particularly well, even if I hope that it does. But I'm going to spruik the Zondernaut as a piece that I would like to explore more in future, even if, bluntly, yeah, it never really seems to make the cut even at 17 points. Now, just a couple more practical things to round out the video, as we've been speaking for so long about stuff that might be considered vanity pick pieces. Zeros, actually, and zeros and specters and hecklers. They're skirmishers, and in many cases it will be useful to have something like this. I don't include these pieces a ton in my lists, but to call out a couple of profiles that I think are interesting. The Forward Observer Zero is a practical infiltrating specialist, that's fine. Other interesting pieces. The 17-point model is just very cheap for being a model in the midfield with camouflage. The deployable repeater model is a model with camouflage and a deployable repeater. Particularly as other network projection becomes more difficult to use or access, that's going to increase in value. The mine layer is a mine layer, and the paramine is especially scary there. But mine layers also have value in Nomads for concealing the existence of a bearcat. And then to jump over just briefly to the Heckler, oh look, Rob's going to extol the virtues of a +1 burst boarding shotgun. Take a shot and die because you've drunk so many times this video already. But, no, actually, genuinely, that's a +1 burst boarding shotgun on a camouflage BS-12 mimetism piece. That's cool, and it's a camouflage marker that hides an Emerat. For multiple editions of the game now, that has had the ability to just toilet bowl an opponent turn, and the Heckler in N5 is no different. Lots of very, very dangerous attack pieces can be stalled out at the terminal approach by an electromagnetic template, and while, yes, it would certainly be nicer to pay 13 points for this kind of equivalent currency in White Banner, where that's how much it costs for a model under a Zapper, a Heckler can at least hide amongst other camouflage markers, do much stronger active duty, and an Emerat is a much bigger template than a Zapper. I don't put these in lists a ton, but 20 points for a Burst 3 shotgun and an Emerat under camo is totally worthwhile. Finally, because it would be a travesty if I didn't mention them, yes, Bearcats are the best drop troops in the game, but Hellcats are by no means bad either, and they are much more discount. Now, you can take the Spitfire, and just for a moment, sorry, also, shut up, they land on 15s, right? That's really useful. That lets you do with a drop troop the same kind of things that Nomads do with their hackers, where you can get potentially a lot of capability out of a relatively small number of points. The Bearcat, because it is such an investment, often kind of needs to parachute us in. It doesn't want to try and make the landing roll. But a Hellcat is cheap enough and landing on 15s that fuck it, we ball. And that's often very, very valuable. For days, infiltrate, impersonate into a deployment zone on 15s. The same kind of a role to land a drop troop in the game after all reserves is high value, and there are plenty of Hellcat profiles that can make use of that. The one that I obviously want to call the most attention to is the deployable repeater for all of the things we've said previously about deployable repeaters, but you can also just skip straight past placing a repeater and just land a 22-point hacker in your opponent's deployment zone. One of those featured in a recent battle report on this channel, and it did tremendous fucking work. And if you've been playing Bearcats and you're like, wow, this piece is incredibly good, but I would also like 8 more points in order to have other things in my list, give some consideration to a piece like the Hellcat Hacker or Hellcat Paramedic, or even hell, the Hellcat Spitfire. Spitfires in people's back arcs have always done huge work, and you can just land this thing on 15s. And so, almost an hour and a half in, these just keep getting longer. Let's wrap this up with a list. Now, I went through a bunch of lists trying to figure out what I wanted to show off and things I wanted to demonstrate, and which vanity pieces I wanted to personally include. And this is just one of several that I landed on. And frankly, I think it's a travesty that I don't have a Cyclone in there, but I had to make some compromises, and so it got cut. This is fitting a balance of defense and things I think that are sensible to include, and stuff I personally think is really cool and want to try. It is not a competitively optimized and practiced list. I have never played this list. I wrote it before recording this video going, oh, that's cool, I could fit that. Would I play it? Yes, but it is the first step in an exploratory process, which you, if you're a Nomad player, should undertake yourself. Maybe cut some of the things here that you don't like and add in things that you do. Or you can easily revert to the older type and go moderator, moderator, tactical armored gear of choice, hacker of choice, probably Jazz, Masai Moran, 2 Morlocks, couple of auto-generating pieces, and then the rest of the world is your oyster. That is still a really, really good list archetype that works totally fine. This, however, is an example of how we can fit different vanity pieces into a list alongside stuff that is powerful and good, and include a wide array of the capabilities that I thought were really interesting in Nomads. So we are beginning with a Kriza Borak. We have white noise in this list to enable the Kriza Borak to do white noise shooting against enemy models with visors, do things like engage enemy bolts, or really put the boot into something like a marksmanship total reaction bot, if those are things. I don't see those that often these days, but it's still a thing that can exist. And one of the first pieces that I've put in this list, and actually probably the main vanity piece, realistically, that is in this list, much of the rest of the list is pretty practical, is we are trying out the utility duo with the Evader. The Evader is adding its own +1 special dice boarding shotgun, it is adding a 10-bot firewall, it is a specialist, it is a veteran troop with D charges. So what it is really doing is taking the Kriza Borite and saying, no, this is a duo now that can move the field and have more orders spent on it than just suppression duties from the Kriza. That's a space I want to explore. I would usually use the Kriza as the cheapest possible big heavy machine gun that isn't an intruder, but which can do work and which can combine with an interventor. Now it's potentially doing something more. We then have a Puppet Master and 2 Puppet Bots. Now, I very strongly considered cutting these to fit in more jank, and you could absolutely do that. But on the grounds that someone somewhere might actually play this list, I wanted to make sure especially that your defense was covered. The Puppet Bots are therefore in this list, well, in part because I love peripherals, I've established that, but also because they are 2 expendable pieces. You can run them as your reserve drop easily enough if you need to, and just have the Puppet Bots there to die for the cause and stop something like a red eye from coming in and ruining your day. They might also move forward and be Willpower 14 specialists. They might also be 3 dice boarding shotguns. We love those, take a drink. But they're mainly there for defense. We then have the Coyote. It's the Coyote profile that I recommended. I love it to bits. It's one of the most fun models to play in the game. And the deployable repeater will play into some other things this list is doing because you'll see down below a Vertigo Zond. Now, there is some risk here because this list has literally one hacker capable of spotlighting, but it also has a bunch of forward observers, and you might use those from time to time. Like I mentioned, I am of the opinion the Bambabot can be a viable forward observer. Frankly, so can the Coyote. But specifically because I have recently seen people say they no longer have to fear guided missiles, that is a strong incentive to me to put guided missiles into a list. Now, I might not use them. It's probably fine if that happens. It's only 16 points. I had the SWC spare. But as soon as I see someone say, very seriously, this no longer has to be worried about, bam, that's a sign to get it into a list, and so this list is running a guided missile package. Now, it's running that off the back of forward observers and a single willpower 15 hacker, but it's the Interventor Lieutenant with plenty of network projection. And so while I am by no means going all in on guided and would regularly expect to never fire a guided missile, other than maybe after having ARO'd something with a spotlight, the tool is on the table. We then have a Bearcat for all of the reasons I have spoken about. It is the best drop troop in the entire game. We are going to take it, and we are going to try and parachute it on rather than land it most of the time for consistency. Two Morlocks with assault pistols, I have extolled their virtues, and then the Vertigo Zond and a Transductor Zond. In Combat Group 2, we have our second big gun, the Intruder. He will be relatively static because he just doesn't have the orders to move around, so I'll pick a location for him where the Morlocks can easily support, and he can support the advance of various different pieces. We have a Stempler Zond because tactical awareness forward observer remotes in Combat Group 2 are consistently an excellent way to maximize the performance of those combat groups. They move at the field by themselves, and in Nomads, that's particularly valuable because it's a repeater that moves under its own power, and the Masai Moran is in this combat group for the same reason. This won't be something that happens all the time, but I do expect to have situations where the Moran can use stealth to sneak forward using maybe 2 orders and have gotten a repeater to my opponent's deployment zone, at which point I could do guided missile stuff potentially. We've got a Transductor Zond, and then finally a Sasha. The Sasha in Combat Group 2 is another specialist, but mostly what she is an order outlet. I will mostly be spending orders in this combat group on the Intruder, shooting and recamouflaging, on the Sempler, moving forward, doing mission stuff, on the Moran, placing crazy koalas, maybe readjusting its position. But any orders I have spare, including the Sasha herself, will be spent throwing EM grenades. That sounds kinda jank, but it has consistently proved high value. And the rain of grenades, it just does things to people's heads, man. It forces them forward, it forces them to come and engage you in the knowledge that if they do nothing, that will continue to happen. It's half the reason why one of the best troops in the entire game and top of my nerf list is Mine Layer fucking Jackals. Never mind that they literally always crit me every game I play against them because they impose that obligation to deal with them because the risk of EM in particular is catastrophically high if left unaddressed. The Sasha does that for 6 points and is a specialist and an order outlet in this combat group. She might never do anything other than give your opponent the sweats, and given I had exactly 6 points after putting everything else in this list, that's totally fine. In another universe where Morlocks were AVA3, she would probably be a Morlock, but they aren't, so she isn't, and she'll do just fine by herself. And that is our sample Nomad list. That is including, in my opinion, the correct number of vanity pieces, which is 1. Like, as much as I said the Coyote could fall into that position, I think the Coyote is fucking excellent. It's a successful vanity piece, in my opinion, which means that this list is moving on to the next thing to experiment with, which is the Evader as part of that Evader-Cruiser duo. Is it good? I don't know, but when you're doing experiments, you change one variable at a time, and I can speak to the rest of this package. So now we're adding a drop of Evader to the solution to see how it changes things, and I'm optimistic at what it might accomplish. If it doesn't work, no worries, there are a ton of ways to spend 23 points productively in Nomads, and we'll try one of those instead. And that concludes this long video on Nomads as a faction. As a reminder, 3 thanks that were given at the beginning of this video. 1 to Burlsford for the updated Nomad identifier sheet, which I have just realized I have forgotten to use for the entire fucking video. God fucking damn it. Well, we got this far, who cares? Maybe I can edit it in after the fact or something. If this video releases with those things up, you'll know that I've somehow figured out what to do. Secondly, thanks to Antipansy and Matt Bissell, both of whom made requests for Nomad faction focuses. I hope very much that you've enjoyed this video. As a reminder, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube to offer your ongoing support. It is thanks to supporters that I am able to make these videos because, bluntly, I work a very busy job and I have to justify how I spend my spare time carefully. And this little bit of extra financial support does really go a very long way. So thank you to everyone who supported the channel, past and future. We cover Infinity and other games, and that means we'll be back next week with more Infinity content. So I'll see you then, and I hope very much, as always, that you enjoyed this.